Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today with me I have Professor Meg and then Allison and Daniel from Play the Game HQ. And we're doing our first impressions of Heat, Pedal to the Metal from Days of Wonder games. Now, before we dive into this, there is a playthrough you can check out over on their channel. Go ahead and check that out. We just finished a full playthrough. And when I say first impressions, that's because the two of us have played this only just the one time.
Yeah.
Although you guys have done a few times.
We played a couple of learning games for the playthrough with
our
kids.
boys, yeah.
And this game is a racing game from Days of Wonder. There'll be a bit of an overview of how to play as well. You can check that out over on their channel. We're going to be diving straight into, I'll give you like a minute of how this plays, and then we'll dive straight into the actual opinions and all that. General idea, as far as the gameplay, is this is a racing game. It's a racing game with a variable number of laps. I believe this particular map over here, the game comes with 4 in the box, and this particular map has 2 laps by default. And you're going to be going ahead and racing along that by managing your heat. Heat is the core mechanic in the game as you try to spend and use heat for different purposes, for good and bad, and managing that heat in the game is a big part of it. Every turn you're going to be managing your gears and the speed of your car, playing cars down to the table, playing a number of cars equal to your speed, and then trying to take advantage of different perks of being last place, first place, of slipstreaming behind other players, of spending heat to go a little further, managing the cooldowns, all of that, trying to keep that in balance, mindful of the turns on the track where there are various turns where you can't go faster than the number without taking a penalty, and again, that's where the heat comes into play as the currency you're constantly playing with. At the end of the game, whoever has crossed furthest past the finish line after two laps will win the game, and that's the basic idea. There's a few modules mixed in that you can try to experiment, whether there's a solo mode, there's different things you can mix into the experience, but that's the general high-level overview of this game. And with that, let's go ahead and dive into our opinions of the game, starting off with what we liked about the experience, and I guess I'm actually most curious. I'll save you for last. I'm most curious about you because I know you walked in with a lot of opinions. Yeah. But like,
I always do.
Allison, starting off with yourself, what did you like about the game?
All right, when we first got it, I was like, it's a racing game. It's a racing game. So I kind of had low expectations of it, but we played it. The first time I was like, okay, that was fun. The second time I was like, okay, Daniel, we need to own this. Like, this is really fun. And I think what really drove it home as far as watching my 9-year-old be really strategic. Mm-hmm. Peyton, how he was managing his cards and that type of thing, it was really fun to watch that. And then the turns.
Yeah, the turns are
that was really fun. Now, there's a couple games that we've played in the past where it actually feels there's a new game coming out next year that you actually feel like you're behind the wheel.
Which one's that?
Drift. It's
Drift. I haven't played that. Good Games Publishing. Yes, have not played it.
This one feels like I'm remote controlling my car by how I'm playing compared to how that game plays. But I still really love the racing element of it. It's not like Camel Up where it's a race.
Camel Up is more of a betting game. Yeah.
Right. So, but people are like, it's a racing game. And I'm like, nah, this is a race. And I really like how your gears matter by how you're playing your cards. You need to, that hand management. It's a lot of fun. So, yeah, I want this on our shelf.
Yeah.
Daniel?
I agree. We played one game, so we played 3 games total. Mm-hmm. We had one where Jared got stuck behind. He spun out and he got stuck behind on a curb. But other than that, it's been, this game too was a really close race.
It was pretty close. Watch the game.
It was
despite
fun.
Some people being pretty far behind at certain points in the game, everyone caught back up. You're never fully out of it because of some of the stress cards and the randomness that it is included in it. It never felt like there's a runaway winner. And I don't know, we haven't played with the module, so I don't know what that adds in, if that does add in some of those abilities. But I love how close it was the entire time and just constantly swapping first players. Even when you had a worse hand, there's ways to there's some catch-ups.
Lots of mitigation.
Yes, to just to keep it interesting and not okay, we're fighting for second.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about how the weather element comes into play with those other modules. I'm excited about that, just especially turning. If it's raining, are you gonna slide further and you have to pay with heat? I don't know.
And I do know with the there's some modules where I think each of these white boxes here, the buildings, you randomize some chips and you put those on it, and those adjust sections of the track. And I think there's 12 total. So it's random, and it makes the track where it's different each time.
That's some of them very important to the opinion I have.
Yeah, some of those address the change
variability,
from a turn to the next turn. Some of them increase the speed, decrease the speed. But they do. It's random, and there's a lot of them. I don't know exactly what those do, but I know that's how that element works for that.
Yeah, that's cool.
So
now, I know you walked in expecting to be very mad at. I don't know where you ended up on this one.
Yeah, so I think for what it does it very well. Something that I really appreciate is like with the speed mechanic, you don't want to go too fast around a corner, and all of the spots are numbered for you, so you can very easily have your cards in your hand and know exactly how fast you'll be going, except for the stress cards, which are a surprise, so you can go a little bit faster. That being said, I think it's a great racing game. It did it really well. I don't know if it's something I need to play again.
Still not your genre.
Yeah, it was fine.
There was no blood.
I think it did it really well. So if you like racing, it did do it very well. I think it was all very seamless. It felt natural. All of the moves felt like you could always do something. I even was the only one that had like a spin out, and I still could recover and came back from it. So I think it's very well executed. But that being said, if it's not your genre, I don't think it's going to make you love racing games.
Yeah, and for me, that I do enjoy and appreciate racing games. I don't know if I love it as my genre. I've always enjoyed them when I play them, and they've rarely really been the game that I pull out when it's time to pull a game off the shelf. And that is to me a big question mark about this, because I did very much enjoy this. Over the past year, I've played a bunch of racing games, both prototypes and final games, that have a lot of like fighting elements in them. And this is the first pure racing game I've played in a long time. And like I don't even think I've played Formula D. I haven't played what's the one that's based off of? Oh my gosh, this is one that's based off of, a little bit based off of. Flamme Rouge, thank you. Flamme Rouge is a little bit based off of that. Just some of the drift.
I don't know where that came from in my brain.
Some of the slipstreaming mechanics are a little bit based on that. It's a bicycle game, but I haven't played a pure racing game like this in quite some time, and I did very much enjoy it with some question marks or caveats. The experience in general, I liked a lot. Like you said, like the management of the heat is a core element. The way you can push and pull that. I think if you're too conservative with your heat, you won't have opportunities to push it a little further and pull back and constantly cool down. And so that balances the game, incentivizes you to take some risks, but you have to manage and mitigate about how many risks are in play. I definitely enjoyed that currency system at the table. I like the slipstreaming around, the fact that the game does have a seemingly good balance of helping the players in last place still be invested in the game while keeping the players in first place still rewarding them for racing ahead. Although with the caveat that because of how close our entire games were, I question whether it's too balanced. It keeps the tension high the entire time, but doesn't mean that the game is almost going to hit a natural pacing of you're always close, kind of taken away from the gameplay aspect. I was curious about the things that the game will add as far as the modules. That aspect of the randomization is a big one for me, because the biggest thing I'm concerned is that the game comes with 4 maps, which is great, which is awesome. But the problem is on a single map, you might hit those tempos. Even on a 2-lap race, we hit certain tempos as far as where we ramped up, where we scaled down, and it can start to feel a bit procedural over multiple plays, but that might not be a problem with the randomness and the mixed in.
And then you also have car upgrades.
2 laps too. And I think if we had like 3 or 4 laps, it would feel too repetitive in that, those same turns and things like that.
Because of how much we did stick together, there wasn't, I think it would be, I think by the 3rd lap, you're going to be in the heat management is really probably just worn out.
And that's the thing. I think in racing games in general as a genre, they do fall into that weird tempo where if the game lets people have a far gap, you very quickly could be disincentivized from playing because it's just not fun to watch that person be behind or be the person behind. The flip side of that is if you give the right mechanics that allow people to catch up, then it sometimes feels like there's not as much skill as the game just helping balance things as you go. And I think this did hit a pretty good tempo, but a tempo that I don't know. I'm curious how that tempo holds up over multiple plays if it constantly feels the same way. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I think I most echo what you said. If you like racing games, this is one that very much hit that feel of a race, giving you that element, that ability to get ahead, those occasional moments of risking just a little bit too much and just having yourself just fall short at the finish line, of adding a little more stress to your deck. There's all these small little elements and tempos that work well as far as the mechanics at play. As far as anything you are concerned about or quibbles, anything?
I don't know. Like when we first started playing, it's like it's going to be repetitive or over and over and over. But I look at it as Days of Wonder. You've got your Ticket to Ride, and it fits that family genre really, really well. I can see this easily being an evergreen in that family genre, and that's why we want it to be on our shelf, because we have a young family. And it's like, this is definitely one that it'll hit our table. Now, Daniel and I playing 2, but we won't pull this out for a 2-player game. Or with adults coming over. We won't play this, although this was a lot of fun.
It really was.
The 5 of us. But it's not one of those that as adults coming over, we play it. But gosh, as a family game, it really hits the mark for us.
And I think there are some of the other modules, I know there's like individual mechanic, like car mechanic modules that give unique powers to different players. And the one thing that I have noticed that happened constantly during this game is like you said, the almost too balanced, where someone who's way behind, like I may play a great hand and be in the lead, and then you play a weaker hand, but just because you were in last place, you're now ahead of me. And I think
And the
that
slipstreaming mechanics as well.
yes,
Yep.
and the slipstream of the last place, all of that made it feel a little like, well, that was, I feel like I did really good and you still are ahead of me. And I think those other modules might fix that because, again, those unique player abilities, and I know there's more ways to mitigate heat. So it feels like just when you expand on that, there's going to be more strategy involved to be able to not just, where it's not purely linear and everyone has the exact same abilities and the exact same hand. So I think that I would hope would solve some of that, because that's the one thing that I kind of critique, is it did feel at times as if the catch-up
was too powerful.
it brought it right back to neutral instead of allowing people to get ahead.
Which is amazing for
It
the
makes it a good-
experience,
yeah.
Yes.
but it takes away from the feeling of I played well.
Right.
Which also
Yeah.
what makes it a great family game. I think it'd be
Yeah,
fun for
I agree
someone
with
who
that.
grew up watching NASCAR races and stuff like that. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if there was a module where you'd have cards that like, oh, you need to go replace your tires. So when you lap, you need to pull into the pit
Yeah.
stop or things like that. Just like, oh, I want that too. I mean, it's not needed, obviously. That would add a whole nother element and a lot of like hiccups, I think, along the way. But I think that'd be a lot of fun to add something like that in there for those that like that type of racing game.
Megan, any concerns on your end?
The only thing I'm curious about is that we played a pretty high player count. So I feel like we were doing that slipstream a lot, that we were all kind of lining up together, and that's kind of what was helping keep it balanced.
Yep.
I wonder if at a lower player count, it's easier to get further apart from each other because you can't slipstream as much.
At 4, it was the same experience.
Yeah.
Other than, again, we had one game where Jared got pretty far behind because he spun out multiple times, or he was testing things out and he spent all of his heat early and then couldn't get through the turns. So he got stuck in the turns and we were able to get a couple ahead.
Yeah, we did. We got 2 turns ahead of him. But yeah.
Yeah, on mine there's a few aspects, most of which you touched upon. The biggest aspect, the question of engagement versus balance is a question mark. Either way, there's a compromise. You're either making the experience potentially worse, or you're making the reward feel potentially not as good. I do think that, especially towards endgame, that the idea of being able to draw certain cards with the stress, which I think over the course of a game can balance out, as you hit endgame can definitely be a factor as far as just that how your last hand plays out, how those final cards get drawn, or things like that. There's definitely a degree of that, as well as same thing with the turns. Playing into the stress as a mechanic is a very fun mechanic that, again, worked very well for us. So overall, I think it worked great, but I'm curious to see how that plays out of multiple plays. Same thing with the map aspect. I'm just curious about, again, what's going to mix it up, what's going to keep the experience over-changing for the most part. But I think overall, I enjoyed very much what it's doing as far as a racing game. I'm curious to see the main aspect is that balance versus how is it too balanced is the question. Yeah. As far as final thoughts, for myself, I'll just jump straight into this, and whoever wants to dive in. Final thoughts for me is I am curious where this one ends up for me. I have been enjoying a lot of racing games over the past year, and a lot of them have other fighting elements mixed in or other things mixed in. This is the biggest pure racing game I've played recently, and I did very much enjoy it. I would say I have the same question mark I have on this as I have on many of those, which is I liked it, I enjoyed it, I'm always down to play it. Will I ever pick this off the shelf? Is this the game that I'm going to pick up and pull, or is this the game I'm just happy to sit down on the table because it plays really quickly, you can get a nice hour-long racing experience that feels high energy, that feels like it rewards everyone at the table for being there and just having a good time. You have high fives, you have moments of I did this, I failed there. It gives you a good, enjoyable experience, but to me it almost falls into the party, or as you said, family game genre for me. It's something that I'm happy to engage with, but I don't know if it'll give me the highs where I'm sitting it down, where I'm intentionally choosing it to sit down at the table with friends and engage with it.
Yeah. I could see it being one that I pull off the shelf with non-hobby gamers, because it is the same as it's as simple as Ticket to Ride, but it's more exciting because it's race cars and not trains. So it falls into that same.
Careful, there's some train people that are like, excuse me?
But
there's trains in this one.
Yeah, there's a train track right there. But I think it falls into that same, like, it's so easy to teach. It's so a little bit confusing at first, kind of the flow of things, but a couple rounds in, you know exactly what you're doing mechanically. So I think I would love to own it as a family game. I think the boys have asked to play it over and over.
Yeah.
So I could see it coming off for that. I like the multiple levels of complexity. There is hey, you don't play a lot of games, let's play this just at the base level, and you're not, because of the balancing stuff, you're not going to feel like, this is why I hate games. Like, and then the more you get into it and the more comfortable you get with it, there are ways to expand it. So yeah, I have not played a lot of racing games. So I have not had much racing game experience other than a couple prototypes that we played at Gen Con.
Yeah.
So for me, this is a great kind of fresh experience. I really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it every time I played it. I think it exceeded expectations a little bit just because it's hard to know how like a racing game is going to play. Is it just going to be like too simple where you're just playing cards for numbers and moving according to that? And I think this does a good job of at least elevating it beyond that simple cards for numbers and really just kind of...
I think that's pretty much my takeaway too, of just it exceeded my expectations, but my expectations were lower because it felt like it would have been basic. It was way more strategic than I thought, and I was excited to play it again.
Yeah, excellent. With that, I'm Alex Racker from Board Game Co. This is Professor Meg, Allison and Daniel from Play the Game HQ, and that's our first impressions of Heat from Days of Wonder. Until next time, I hope you have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.